Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Hey, you cool cats and kittens.
Oh, Carole Baskin's in the house. How's it going?
Good. I'm pretty upset right now and suing Netflix, but we'll talk about that later.
Oh, I just realized I said Carole Baskin's. I added an S when you're not supposed to add an S.
Just
Yeah,
like thinking
just
Baskins
like-
and Robin.
Just like daylight saving time.
Yeah.
I always want to say daylight savings.
Me too.
Time, but there's no S.
There's no S.
It's daylight saving time. Speaking of that, that's coming up here in a day or so.
Yep.
And you get an extra hour of sleep. I'm of the mind that because of our cell phones, I use my phone as my alarm. I use it for a clock, or I have an Apple Watch. I never have to think about that. Like, I don't have to think about setting my clock back or ahead. It's just, it does it. Like,
I don't think about setting my clocks back or ahead. I think about setting my children back or ahead because it really messes with.
like their sleep schedule.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah.
think it's more the spring forward
Oh,
in the spring, but
where
still
they lose an hour.
Yeah, but still, this is the beginning. I feel like of the crapshoot.
It takes a while for me to readjust, like how. I mean, it's already getting darker earlier, but then like I'm driving home and it feels like I should be in bed,
Oh, yeah.
So that's the thing about this.
Right.
And typically, like I did student ministry for like a decade, and every year we did our retreat, and they still are this weekend. So be praying for them.
Where they
That's the moment where they have it that same weekend because it's always the first weekend in November. So I was just used to never getting that extra hour of sleep, and so I'm mad at anybody who did because
Yeah.
you're at a retreat and you just don't. Like,
You don't
instead
get
of getting
sleep on
that, kids are like, we got it, free hour. It's like going to Vegas. Like, whatever happens this hour, nobody is ever going to talk about. I mean, not at a Christian retreat, but I've heard some people that have treated it like that. And so
Lots of
how I
good
feel.
points.
Yeah, I think my internal clock, the older I get, is just so, I don't know. It seems more accurate than ever. Like I just wake up and I like before my alarm most of the time.
Wow.
So I wonder if that will affect it. I'll just wake up an hour early.
We're gonna have to check in with you next week.
I don't know. I'm worried about it anymore. I think it's a sign of old age. When I visited Hawaii, they don't observe it at all. So
Hawaii and Arizona.
Yes.
yeah, those are the two states to, I guess, check out if you don't like it. That seems like it would be confusing too when
Totally.
you're like someone tells you a time of a live event and because it changes, right? There's standard time and then there's saving time. I don't know. I don't know why we don't have that many farmers and that rely on that hour as much. Isn't that the reason that they originally did it?
Yeah, I think it was just more daylight.
Because
So-
we
More
didn't have
daylight.
electricity.
Because it wasn't about the fallback time.
Yeah.
It was about moving it earlier, really, in the March, to be able to give us
spring
an
ahead.
extra hour. Yeah, so that was the bigger deal. But then we always have to rewind at this time. But the good news of all of this is
Do
I
tell
have in my car, I have an unfunctioning clock. I can't change the time.
Okay.
So I'm excited that it's going to be the
gonna
right
be-
time.
You've been
So
an
like the
hour off.
minutes are
It's
always
gonna be the right
correct.
time.
But then it's like one of those things. Anytime someone gets in my car, they're like, "Your time's wrong." I'm like, "I know," and the button's broken, so I can't change the hour hand. So
You're like, I only observe daylight saving time.
only. So that's exciting. That's coming up
That
on
is.
Sunday.
I'm happy for you.
I am really, really happy for you as well. All right. Up next, we've got headlines. Our first headline comes from Omaha.com, another a local story, or at least across the river, over on my stomping grounds, Council Bluffs. One of our prized possessions over there is a woman who is 107 years old.
That is precious.
Yeah,
It is.
one of the most strong-willed and independent ladies I know, says the headline. As a Council Bluffs woman who just celebrated her 107th birthday, says that taking every day as it comes is the best way to enjoy a long life.
So good.
I thought it was Dr. Pepper, but apparently not. Wasn't there like someone
Yes,
that?
there was. There was like a Dr. Pepper day. These are the type of people 107. I think they should set up a advice line and people just call and she just tells it like it is.
Oh, like a
That
TikTok. Like a
Yeah.
TikTok where they call her, and yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, I don't know what I think about that. Like, I guess if you're in decent enough health, then and you can manage, and like that just seems like a really long time.
It is.
But I
That's
guess-
a lot of life to live.
I mean, it's not like an Old Testament age, though.
Correct.
Not in the upper hundreds.
Or it's not like the lady that is in Europe's oldest person. She is 117.
Oh,
well,
Sister
let's
Andre.
not detract from our
Okay.
local
I mean,
headline.
It's in the same article.
considering Americans' diets, we are pretty proud of this 107. Okay,
That's incredible.
let us have it.
I also have a local question that I think that just the people would want to know because, it's fall. And we're just wondering, Alex, if you have
Winterized my
drained
pool.
and winterized your pool.
I
was-
did winterize my sprinklers last week. I did not have a powerful enough air tank. That's what you have to blow them out with.
Compressor?
And air compressor. That's the word I'm looking for. So I had a friend, maybe he listens, bring over his like pin nailer one, and it took
Okay.
like 3 hours.
Oh, wow!
that
I'm really
thing.
glad we
All
could
right,
get
now
this
we
update.
know. I think that we just all feel
But no
satisfied
pool.
with
Yeah,
that.
you're welcome.
Speaking of impossible segues, here is another story coming from NPR.org. It says Carole Baskin's lawsuit says she didn't agree to be in Tiger King's sequel.
She didn't. What?
According to her, if I understand this correctly, she was told this was kind of going to be like a one-off documentary about her animal reserve or whatever.
Okay.
And so she's saying that she was duped by Netflix to be put in the sequel, Tiger King 2, the sequel to the Netflix streaming series that we all, zoned out to distract ourselves from the
We all
pandemic.
watched it. Like, don't deny it.
That was a wild time.
We could barely, could get a hold of Alex for like the whole day.
Just
binging it
Yeah.
over and over, which is why I opened with that intro.
Yeah, I know.
yeah.
Because I
You're a
just
cool cat and
say that.
kitten.
I am.
I mean, it's one of those things where I don't know.
These are questions I ask. You got a contract from a huge company that, I mean, okay, maybe they could sneak something in there. We won't put it past them. But if you're going to be a part of it, what did you miss?
Yeah.
Okay, that's just.
I will say,
question.
from watching just this, didn't even get through it. I got through 1 minute and 13 seconds of the official trailer. I would say, I don't know that I could recommend fully part 2. It seems like, and I think a lot of. Obviously, this, I think, had sheer luck of the pandemic when it released, and that's what captured everyone. They're like, there's nothing to
Okay.
do. And it's one of those shows that makes you feel better about your life, for sure. Like, anybody that's watched that's like, okay, my life's not terrible right now. But I think...
At least I'm not eating
Yeah.
spoiled Walmart meat on pizzas.
Yeah. But I do think, like, every time they want to, like, top it or they had all this success that was not probably totally warranted, and now it feels like now they're just like pumping in sex and more guns and like
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
watch that trailer like I did for 1 minute and 13 seconds,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to spend some moments between our guests and this repenting. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's a. I don't know where to
my
go.
words
don't let your
are
children
taken.
watch it, Jess.
But I
for
feel
them.
like the Tiger King was like, you couldn't look away because it was like a crime documentary.
Yeah.
That it was just like, what's happening? There's
Well, it felt
nothing
not
like
real.
it.
Like I remember, I honestly started it later than a lot of people, and I thought like, as people were describing it or like dressing up as it, I thought it was like
I did that.
not real,
Like a mockumentary.
Yeah, I thought it was a mockumentary, and then like not until I actually watched it did I realize this was an
8
actual
hours later.
documentary.
Just fell down that rabbit hole. It says here that the Baskins also filed for a temporary restraining order that would have stopped the release of the show, but it was quickly denied by the judge the same day. So
He wants to watch it too.
Yeah, the judge is like, no, can't keep this show from us. But I think there was some intrigue there, though, because there was like kind of a cry for even Trump to release
Yeah, people
Joe from prison, and so I think there's a lot of like unresolved story that people are probably going to come back to this, just if nothing else, just out of curiosity of where this is headed and how maybe some of it wrapped up. But
I know we'll be there.
You will. Jess is watching. Alex is saying no, he can't get through the
I don't believe him. I honestly, I really don't.
You just don't. You just called him out here, Alex. You're gonna watch the Tiger King 2, and
because we're gonna talk about this in a future
I'll
headline.
wait
I'm sure.
for the version that
edited.
the edited version, like they did with Titanic.
Okay.
Where they take out all the bad stuff and then they send it to me.
Just watch the second VHS of Tiger King 2. You'll be okay.
Yeah, I'll be good. So,
well,
all right. Yes, up next we have 2 guests returning. This doesn't happen too often, but we're kind of deciding to do a bit of a follow-up episode with Chaka and Carly. This was one of our early episodes.
Yeah.
This is like
2 years ago now.
9
Before
or something
Jess.
like that.
Just over 2 years ago.
Yeah. So it should be good to catch up with them and kind of revisit their story and what's happened in the time since we last spoke to them.
Okay, so we are back, which is crazy to think over 2 years later with Chaka and Carly. We started this podcast 2 years ago, and some of our first infant episodes were with both of you ladies coming in and sharing. Episodes 8 and 9 were how to cope with loss. And so not usually the best way to be invited onto a podcast, because both of you had been dealing and still are, 2 years later, but with loss that was significant, especially around your children. And so just, people can go back, and we'll put this in the show notes. They can go listen entirety and grab a box of Kleenex and be ready to listen and process with God in their entirety, those episodes. But just to kind of give us, what brought you to those first show, what was the loss that you suffered, and then we'll kind of get into your story since. And so I don't know if either one of you ladies wants to
You can go first.
jump in.
Sure. All right. Well, I'm Chaka. And 3 years ago now, we lost our 11-year-old son, Landon, 4 days before his 12th birthday. And I got to share with you his heart issues and what we had gone through, and the struggle of loss. Because when we came on here last time, it was only he died in 2018, and it was 2019, right? The fall of 2019. When was it for you?
August. For after?
Yeah.
Yeah, she died in January of 19, and we did this in August.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we were both like
fresh.
Yeah. And it's a different place now. There's still grief. There's still hardship. There's still nights where I have to wander around my house at night while everybody's sleeping and try to be quiet, sobbing as I pray to God. But there's also God has brought so much healing in the last 2 years. Well, 3 years since he went home. But God has done a great amount in this time, and I don't know how people do this without him.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And Carly, how about you? What originally brought you here?
We were pregnant with our second. We had, at that point, Mason was 3, and we were pregnant with our daughter. And normal pregnancy, everything was A-okay until 35 and a half weeks. And got to work that morning and realized I hadn't felt her heartbeat. And quickly went back to the doctor, and sure enough, they start checking, and there's no heartbeat. And I remember writing once, it was like flying on, cruise control in an airplane, and you're just at cruising altitude, and someone just ejects the door, and everything flies past you. And that's what it was. And just the roller coaster of her death, but then having to deliver, and the time that took, mentally and physically, and then having to plan the funeral. And then for me, it was a lot of mental fights on waiting to figure out what was wrong with me, because it just wasn't over, and I couldn't go straight to grieving. It was, well, now you have preeclampsia, you've got this, we got to check for that. Now it's wait till April for a blood test. And so it was a lot of waiting and not really ever getting an answer. And that's still where I was in August when we did the first episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me as someone who pastors, these are unfortunately not the first, conversations I've had with people around this, but what I've found that's been a huge blessing is to be able to share both of your stories, the pain and even the hope that you shared in the second episode of how you had been seeing God at that point in the story since, which is such a blessing, but also just your stories are similar but very different, as well. And that's everybody's story. Each story is unique, and partly why we want to bring both of you to share your perspective on, which has been great. So there's a term out there, that's called a rainbow baby. And so both of you, I don't know how familiar you are with that term, but since, you both in God's way have been able to invite new people, new life into your family's lives. And so when we use that term, because I think there's a lot of, in a meme culture, we put these things out there and we want to use it. And part of what I've learned even in the last episode with both of you ladies is everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own preferences, and hearing multiple stories helps me respond better with dignity and grace and empathy to those. And so just to throw that term out there, that usually is thrown around when someone has a child that passes away, and it's used in adoption and in birth. Like what's that term, even like when I say that term, how does that sit with you? Is it something you have a preference for or not? I'd just like to kind of open up with easy question like that.
I would say for me, it's nice because it sums it up easy. If I say rainbow baby, it's like, oh, she had a loss of some kind. I don't know what, but this is a good thing. This is the miracle after. It's the rainbow. It's the promise of new, and that I think it's really nice now to have that on just hashtag rainbow baby, hashtag rainbows are good, or whatever it might be. And it's nice for a very quick, subtle, I don't need to tell the entire lengthy backstory, but this is why this is so celebratory for me, and this is why this is so important. So I think it's good. I think it can be overused, but I do think it's very good. I think, and for me, it's just nice to subtly say, this is why I'm celebrating this so much more today.
I like that. I like that. Because it's almost like you look for a term when you lose a kid, like widow, that identifies someone as, I suffered a significant loss. And I can see how rainbow baby would do that. And for me, I feel like I'm part of a generation that's older. And that rainbow baby was something that was after me, so I don't relate to it as much. And it's usually in regards to someone losing a baby and then having a baby after. And since I didn't lose a baby, I never, so I don't have a feeling one way or the other, but I do like what Carly said about it.
That's helpful. Briefly, and I will let you talk, Jess. Sorry. I just know from just communicating with each of you since that episodes, like we were still in the thick of it, of some of the pain that you were about to endure, even recording those episodes and on the backside. And so just to kind of update those who had listened, maybe share both of you from your perspective. We recorded those episodes, and then it wasn't like tragedy was done striking or feelings of grief were done striking. So just update us on kind of maybe those hours, weeks, months from when we recorded those and released those episodes.
Well, talking about Landon was something I used to do a lot because I had I was part of a speaking ministry called Holy Love, where we go into different churches and speak to women's groups. And my talk was usually about pain and when God meets you in the middle of hardship, since Landon had gone through a lot. And I had decided after he died that I was not going to talk about him anymore because he wasn't a story, just a story to be shared. He was my kid, and I didn't want him to become an antidote. And so, when you asked me to do that first episode, I ended up sharing. I had thought I was going to come in and talk about, how my grief was going. And I ended up sharing the whole story of Landon again. And I didn't even mean to, but I know that I was really trying to let the Holy Spirit lead. And it was needful for somebody, to hear that story. And one of the things, though, that I've learned about God is his ways are not my ways. And a lot of times when I'll do something, like one of the last talks I gave was a breakout session at a women's event at Christ Community. And they asked me to speak on the purpose of pain. And I did the purpose of pain talk. And then the next day, all heck broke loose. I'm trying to be nice.
PG, thank you.
With Landon's health. That was the beginning of the end, the next day after that talk. And I thought, God, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? And so then I came and talked here. And and I know I had probably shared about, I actually did not listen to our talk. I've never gone and listened to any of the talks I've ever given or done. But I'm sure I shared that we had been matched, that we were looking to adopt, and at that time we had been matched with these twins. And so I left, that recording, and I was driving home, and I got a call. I could see my house, and I was rushing home because Maya said the stroller's been delivered. There's a double stroller, and And I was like, oh, cool. And then I got a call from our caseworker, and she said, it's not good news. The babies were born, and she changed her mind. And devastation, because I know I shared in the last podcast how we had driven to Florida, and we were probably within a block of the hospital when birth mom changed her mind, back in June. And then it happened again, right after delivery. And I'm like, God has a way of doing things that I don't know that I'll understand on this side of things. But, and I was upset. That was it was such a blow. It was a hard time. There was like a month of, God, I don't know, was this something we were just trying to conjure up and make happen on our own, and it wasn't your will? And it really hurt. It really hurt. And then a month later, we got a call from an agency, and it was this, I won't go into the whole thing, it's this long, I love that God always seems to show up in a miraculous way in our lives. It's almost like it's supposed to be broadcast. This was God. Yeah. This was God. This is not a normal, and Ezra didn't come home. It wasn't a normal event, but we got a call, and a lady chose us from an adoption agency that never should have looked at us in the first place. And she chose us before the adoption agency even approved us, because it's a Christian agency in Atlanta, and they have to approve whoever comes through because they really want to be selective about who they place babies with. And they hadn't even approved us, and she chose us anyway. And then talking to the agency, and they were like, we're going to get you, we're going to steamroll through this and get everything done. And so we got to talk to Ezra's birth mom, or his first mom, and we hit it off right away. She and I did, and it was something just so miraculous. And so on October 14th, 2019, Ezra Bennett Johnson Hines was born, and we brought him home from Atlanta just a few days after he was born. As a matter of fact, his mom, she handed him, oh my gosh, I get emotional, because we adopted Landon. But it was a situation where social services was taking him anyway. But this time, his birth mom handed him to me in the hospital, and she said, I love you and I trust you. And she, oh my goodness, she put him in our hands, and it was we all cried. It was just one of the most amazing things. But I believe that for all that we had gone through up until that point, it wouldn't have been nearly as meaningful if God hadn't done what he did and proven that he's faithful. Because I'm like, man, 3 babies we lost along the way to Ezra. And then we lost, one agency stole $20,000 from us, just gone in a few days. It was just a crazy journey, and yet I'm so grateful for it. I'm really grateful for what God did, and I wish Ezra's here. He's downstairs with a friend, but it's just a miracle. It's a miracle, and it makes me praise God that much more because of the journey.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I'll give you some Kleenex. We'll all need it. So, how about you, Carly?
Well, so we did the podcast in August. We film's a bad, like an old word.
Yeah.
We recorded on a Wednesday. First episode was released on Friday. Friday night, that same day, I took a test and I was pregnant. I told Trevor, this is like crazy. I remember crying, like I'm excited, I'm scared, but I'm so thrilled. So Monday, I called the doctor. At this point, I'm on like first name basis with all the doctors, nurses, so they knew who I was calling in. It's like, hey, I need to set my 8-week appointment. Sounds good. Start taking aspirin, baby aspirin. That was part of it since I was deemed high risk losing Kenzie. Okay, we start the high risk process. Okay, so that was on Monday. Wednesday, so a week from the day we recorded, leaving work, went to the bathroom, realized I was spotting. I never spotted with any of my other pregnancies. Started kind of thinking it through, so I called my sister-in-law. She's a ER PA, and I'm like, yeah, fast news, I'm pregnant. I don't know what's going on though. I don't feel like this is right. And my head just was spinning immediately. It was about 4:30, so I couldn't call the clinics. And so we talked it through, and she's like, you just have to wait. I'm like, I'm really sick of this word. I'm done waiting. I'm so tired of waiting. And so I get home, and I've got Mason home, and I agreed in my head. I'm like, I'm just not going to say anything to Trevor until we get Mason to bed, and then we can talk. So Mason goes to sleep. Trevor comes back down, and I'm like, hey, I need to tell you something. And at that point, it was definitely clear this wasn't good, whatever it was. And so middle of the night, it was really obvious, okay, I'm miscarrying for sure at this point. So I remember about 1:30 in the morning, I was awake, and he heard me get up, and I'm just crying, and he's holding me, and it's like we knew where this was going. It's just, this is insane. I can't believe this. And the next day, I have an amazing boss. He knew at that point, and so he just said, just stay home, just take the week. We're gonna take all your clients off your workload and just take the rest of the week. So that was a Wednesday. So Thursday, Friday, I stayed home. And the second podcast came out that Friday. And I remember texting you about it that day and saying, hey, I just miscarried, and you were at the bookstore with Maya. And we talked a little bit, and I'm like, no, I'm okay. You don't need to come over. But I just laid on the couch and cried and just cried. I just cried for 2 days, and I have never, ever felt that low. And I had to go in. So I couldn't call in until Thursday morning. So I called my clinic. I'm like, hey, I think I'm miscarrying. Okay, you need to come in for a blood test to see if this is the case. We can check your hormone levels and see if this is what's going on. And so I come in. It's the same clinic where I found out I had lost Kenzie. It's the same blood clinic, to get your labs done. It's the same room that I had the lupus anticoagulant test done. And so I'm in there just holding it together. Just please don't talk to me. I can't talk to anybody. Please just let me get in and get this done. So I'm in there. I get the test done. It takes 2 seconds to take your blood. And then I wait for 3 more hours. My doctor called me personally and said, hey, it looks like you were pregnant, but you're not high enough in your numbers to say that you are pregnant. So it was proof that there was something, but not anymore. And he's like, I'm so sorry. He didn't even have words at that point. And it was just, you need to heal. You need to almost physically cycle for a month. Like, you just need to just let this work through you. I want you back, I think it was like another week later, to go in and do another blood test to make sure my levels had completely cleared out of my system of the hormone and kind of back to square one. And I'm like, okay. So then it was Thursday, Friday on the couch, and I have never felt so shallow and just hollow in my life. Just there was nothing left in me at that point. It's just, I don't want to get off the couch. I have a son that's at this point 3.5, and I have no energy to try. I have a husband that loves me deeply and cares for me, and he didn't know what to say. I have a sister-in-law she's great. She came and brought me lunch one day, either Thursday or Friday, I don't remember at this point, and just sat with me, made me eat, and that meant a lot just for her to come up and see me and go back to Lincoln. And I really had to wrestle with, are you kidding me? I just did this podcast. Like, I have done everything to point God, like everybody to God, and this is how you repay me. Are you kidding me? And it was so hard. And it was just hour after hour of just sitting there in silence with zero ambition to try anything. And so we get to Saturday. It's football Saturday. We have season tickets. And Trevor's like, hey, let's go. We're going to go tomorrow. You know, his parents watch Mason. So you just need to go to the game. We're going to, you know, and kind of a buck up, let's go get back at it. And I remember getting however he said it, I just got upset. And I'm like, you don't get it. I am still draining. Like, I am physically still going through this. And it's exhausting. I have no energy, and I'm mentally still grieving this. Like, I'm okay, I'll go. But he got the back off mentality out of it. And so we go to the game. I don't even remember who we played. It was very hot.
Probably lost.
By
It's one
fair.
possession.
It really wasn't that big of a deal. So we sit at like row 79. So at one point within like the first half, I'm like, I got to go to the bathroom. And so I make it down to the bathroom, which are on the main floor. And I passed a blood clot like the size of a quarter, and I about passed out in the bathroom. It's like, oh my goodness, this is taking everything out of me to have energy to do anything. And I just gathered my wits and made it back up to our row, and again, just made it through. And that was, I went back to work on Monday. But it was just, everything felt useless. Everything was just the next thing. You just start going through the motions, and I'm here to do my job. I'm here to raise my kid and make my meals and do whatever. I don't get where we're going anymore. I lost momentum on what's the point of life at this point. I wasn't suicidal or anything. It's just like, okay, God, what are we doing? Like, can we just get to the point of the story at this point? And I quit writing. I write a lot. And I didn't write at all in September when we got to September. And that's a lot for me to say, to actually just put the books down. And I remember looking back at that now, and it was, I needed to give God the cold shoulder because I couldn't deal with this relationship anymore. It was just, okay, I know you're supposed to be there for me. And you're still the God of my life, but you hurt me really bad. And I just need to just put this down for now. My writing is me talking not to God and like, dear Jesus, this is what is going on today. It's me processing, and I couldn't process this with God because he's the one that hurt me with this. And I had to put it down. And so I did in September. October is pregnancy infant loss awareness month. Didn't know that until I lost Kenzie. It doesn't affect you until it affects you. And so I wrote a nice, pretty post on Facebook and posted some pictures from her funeral. I would highly suggest that, going through funerals now. If anybody goes through that, especially with kids, when it's a kid funeral, man, that was amazing. My mom, when we were in the hospital losing Kenzie and going through the funeral plans, she said, "Hey, is it okay if I contact your photographer who was already lined up to do her pictures?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" She's like, "I'd really like it if she could be there for her funeral." Royce had taken all of our family pictures at that point for Trevor and I and our kids and our wedding and everything. So she came to the funeral and, crying herself, took pictures of our whole funeral and the service and the graveside. And those are some of the best pictures of that time, just to look back and remember it because it goes so fast. But I did put one up that I think speaks a lot of, it was actually my family standing at her grave praying after everybody else had got back in their cars. And so I posted that in October and just said, if you have to sit in the front row of a funeral, at least learn the lesson of life is fragile and it's fast. And just try and realize that God is here, God is working, but man, life is so fragile. And so that was October awareness. Later that month, supposed to get my cycle, trying not to pay attention, but paying attention because I want a kid. I want to move on from this really sour taste in my mouth of not having a kid and then having a miscarriage. Like that's all I could think about. And I've had friends go through it, and it's the same way. It's just sour taste. First thing you want to change every morning you wake up. It's the first thing you want to change. And so at the end of the month, I knew what day it was supposed to show up on. It didn't show up, and finally, like 2 days later, it's Sunday, and I'm like, okay, this is getting ridiculous. I'm waiting. Could you at least say yes and either yay, I get a positive test, or no, and we go on for another month. But instead, I'm just stuck here waiting for something. And finally, Monday morning, still nothing. And I went back and actually pulled the test I had taken on Sunday, and the lines showed up the next day, which was really strange. So end of October, we found out we were pregnant. Didn't tell our parents. 8 weeks was right around Thanksgiving. And so at Thanksgiving, we got to tell our family that we were expecting again. So this time, back on aspirin, and I made it to, he had me come in before the 8-week appointment to do the blood test to kind of make sure my levels were going in the right direction early. And then I went back in 8 weeks, did the ultrasound, things looked good. And then he said, we're going to treat you for high risk. And what I wasn't really prepared for was that's double the appointments. You go in and you see the high risk OB and more ultrasounds, just more clinic time, bottom line. All good. It's a lot of head messing with you, though, because you got to go in twice. And for me, it was the fear of no heartbeat every single time I walk in the door. So that was the beginning of the next adventure, I guess. But yeah. So, and I remember in the middle, to go back, I remember when you said you got Ezra in October. I remember being so mad. It's like, why not me? Like, why does Chaka get to go through this again? She gets to have the excitement. And I knew what you had already been through, but it was just like, so when is it my turn?
Right.
And that was hard. And I was so excited for you, but man, that was hard.
Right.
Yeah, thank you both for the courage, to share. Because I think one of the downfalls of us as Christians sometimes is we don't like to share all the pain and the courage of. No, that was real. I was upset at you, and not necessarily at you, but like just
experience. Yeah.
To share that, like I felt nothing. We have so much pride in us.
Yes,
at least I do. That it's hard to share that sometimes.
It's that real, authentic. In the trenches, no qualms, like just, this is me. This is where I'm at. So kind of looking at the past 2 years, I think like you both kind of shared a little bit of just people that have been around you, or people that have, your sister-in-law bringing you a meal. And I think like one thing that is kind of a trendy term that we use like in the church, and I think is the word community. And like, it's we need to be in community and around community and community groups, and that's like something that we value, but it's also something that's really precious and something that that circle gets a little smaller, and that small community around grief and pain is like, those are the people that are in the trenches with you. And so what's your community been? What's it been like with your community supporting you over the past couple of years?
Well, I'm not going to disparage anybody here. So I want to be careful how I share. My community group, our journey group at that time that we'd been in for a while, it kind of imploded. And part of the reason, actually, the reason was Landon's death. And I dearly love people. I dearly love these people. And they are disciples of Jesus who love God. It's just that not everybody is equipped to walk with somebody through grief and suffering. And it became almost an unsafe place to share. I shared once, you guys, I'm really mad at God. I need you to pray for me. And I got yelled at, yelled at. It was an older person in the church, about, you said you were mad at God. You said you were mad at God. And it was the beginning of like us having to step back, from our journey group. And I feel like in a way it was painful, and I want to kind of address anybody who goes there, because sometimes you get hurt or burned by the people that are closest to you, and that's real. That's real. Your feelings are so valid when you feel that kind of a pain. But also for me, I feel like, God walked us through it, I don't want to dismiss it. It was really hard. It was so challenging. I would have to go to God and again, and God, just help me to forgive, and help me to be forgiven, for any of my part in anything. But I just feel like God had to do a lot of healing. We didn't have a journey group for a while, and then we joined one, and it was kind of a mismatch. And so there wasn't, with church, a lot of community that ended up, like you had said, it kind of got pared down to a few people who I could talk to. I feel like I know that probably my family will listen to this too, but I also feel like it's important to understand, even in my family, it was seen as, not with everyone, but with certain people, as okay, you've got to get over this. Or they don't talk about Landon anymore, and people get really uncomfortable when I bring him up now, as if he's not supposed to be a topic of conversation anymore, and not with everybody. But I feel like that's such an important thing for people to know, that you've got to find your safe people. There are safe people, and not everybody's going to be a safe people. And it doesn't make people evil. No. It doesn't even make them against you. It's just that some people don't know what they don't. Well, none of us, we don't know what we don't know. Yeah. And they just don't understand what it's like to walk through something like this until they walk through it. And so, I feel like God has surrounded me with some incredible people along the walk who have, that would drop everything to be with me, if they could. And those are the people that I still go to. One of them is my sister, my Keisha. See, I mentioned you. But truly, who would, the people that call you and stay in there and don't get so uncomfortable when you talk, and even will share now, like bring up, hey, Landon, we were missing him today. We were just talking about Landon. And I'm like, that does my heart so much good. So there was community. It didn't end up being the community that I thought it would be.
Look how,
exactly. But it ended up, there it was community.
I would say the same thing. And I also would say it's not who you think it will be. I was very surprised at who it really wasn't. And like you say, it's who people are equipped and who kind of steps up into it, and who maybe at their season of their life, they're not ready to step in, which is good. Don't if you're not ready.
Right.
So for me, within a couple weeks of losing Kenzie, my 7th grade teacher actually messaged me on Facebook. We'd connected maybe a year or two before. And she reached out and she said, "Hey, I have some booklets I'd like to send you about grief. Is it okay if I send them to you?" I'm like, "Sounds good. I'll take anything at this point in life." And so she started, they're called Journeying Through Grief with the Stevens Ministries. And it's 4 books. You send them once a quarter. And she would write a note, send the book. And it started us just having this dialogue back and forth about the book and things that we were doing and talking about. And she had been through the exact same thing. Lost a full term. And then I found out later she miscarried and then had another child after that. So it was someone I didn't see coming, and I wouldn't change it at all. It was amazing. She was there for me when I was in middle school. She's the person who actually got me into journaling and writing in the first place. And so she'd kind of placed this on my path a long time ago. And so I was able to share some of my writings with her as I went along. And then another one was another high school teacher. He was my English teacher in high school. And so as I wrote some things, I'd send it to him and say, "Hey, just wrote this, thought you might like it." And so some of those were around. And I actually had another friend who, for me, sometimes it was people outside of my circle completely. I had my family I could talk to. I had Trevor I could talk to. I had the people on my street who were amazing. But sometimes I really just needed that person way on the outside that I actually have nothing in common with. It's an unbiased opinion. Tell me what you think. Like, where am I doing this right? Like, does this make sense? And whether it was about God or grieving, I need an opinion that had nothing to gain. And so that was really nice. I had a few people who, through instant messaging, an app, I'll drop an app, Marco Polo. That has been very helpful. I have a friend who actually, after longtime friends, we've been friends for 20 years now. But after Kenzie, we kind of reconnected a lot. And we're both moms, busy moms, and Marco Polo, it's like sending a video chat, but then they get to open it when they have time. So with really young kids, it's really nice. We have these conversations that take like a week, but it's for us, it's like the only way we can have chat. So things like that have been really helpful, just to kind of, when I have the headspace, I get to do it. So yeah, I agree.
That's helpful. What, I think even just like I said, your vulnerability about that community piece. I remember, like, I even talked to you, like we were due the same day as Mackenzie. And so I was like, me and Aaron were like, we just feel guilty even talking to them, you know? And like, I was the middle school pastor at the time, and Trevor was serving in the ministry, and we had already had this conversation. And even me, I'm like, I've done this. Like, this isn't my first rodeo. I've walked with people through this, but then even that connection of like guilt, and I think that Satan even wants to bring on to other people of like, yeah, you putting your kid in front of them, you know, is going to, you know, make them feel worse. And it's like we try to like hide and avoid corners and things like that, just because you didn't want to feel that way or feel like you were contributing to that in someone else's life. And so God even used, some conversations there to be like, okay, no, this is good. And we're just awkward. We're awkward when we're ignorant to things, you know? And so I think a lot of that is that with people in community and no one like intentionally trying to be painful, but and we don't like to admit that we're ignorant. And so instead of doing that, we just try to power up and like act like we know all the answers, or we do the opposite. We just avoid, you know? And so neither of those are good.
Yeah. I remember, we haven't really met or talked until today, but I was at Landon's funeral, and it was just because it was at the church in the gym. I remember. And, I remember because I had just had a baby in October before, and so it was, I'm sitting there holding my baby, and you had lost yours. And so it was one of those like, do I go or do I not? And I've always had this, I haven't personally lost a child, but God has just put this on my heart just ever since I think I had kids. And so it was just, I want to step into that space that's scary and uncomfortable, and I want to hold space for you. And so, I mean, even in that moment, like I didn't know you, but it was like my mom heart was with your mom heart. And like when you're sharing, like I've never met you, but like my mom heart is with you, and just like the ability that even if we don't experience that loss, we can still hold space and just step into those moments with other people.
I'm going to talk about dad heart now.
I know that dad heart. Because the dad heart is also so precious.
No, what I'm curious about for both of you, and I'm not asking you to throw your spouses under the bus by any means, but like I grieve differently.
Waiting for this. Let's do it. Let's do it, ladies.
I grieve
Staying engineers.
totally differently than my wife, and like they're like, I can't tell you how many moments that I've been married for 11 years. I'm just like, why are you crying? and not even like grief moments.
You genuinely wonder.
I'm just like, why? And she's like, why aren't you crying? You know? So how, because we haven't even been through anything, you know, loss like this. We've had our own shares of unexpected things and pain points in our life. But how have you navigated that relationship as two different individuals? God made probably there's obvious ways he made you different as a male and a female, but then there's the not obvious. And I think sometimes we don't talk about that. You know, I know you shared a little bit about the football game, and Trevor's like, come on, let's go to the football game and let's get over it that way. What are some of those learnings that you've learned maybe that could teach others that are processing this same thing? How do we navigate that in the middle of grief, when people grieve differently, go through emotions differently?
It makes me laugh only because Carly, to the engineers.
It's so true.
We're married to the engineers, and it's a specific personality. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so Jason, I started learning a long time before, you know, we lost Landon, how different we were. Yeah. And that's a good thing. Yeah. It wasn't surprising then. I think that could probably be a real hard bump in your marriage if that's the first time you start recognizing, oh my goodness, you're totally different than me. Because when we first got married, I really would get offended when Jason, I'm talking to you. I am talking to you, because the only time I don't respond to someone is if I'm purposely ignoring them.
Yeah.
You know, because I hear everything.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's a slight. I am purposely slight in my house. I don't hear everything outside of my house. But if I was doing that to Jason, it's because I meant to. Yeah. I'm ignoring you. Do you notice that I'm ignoring you?
Getting the cold shoulder.
Yeah. Yes. But for Jason, honestly, unless you have his attention, he didn't hear you. Yeah. You could be talking in his ear. He could even go, you know, and if he's not looking at you.
Jason, we're calling you out, bro.
Yeah, he has no idea. And it's not, so I learned, he's not trying to be offensive. He really is, his brain is very focused, you know, and you've got to get his attention. You know, he is just so different from me. I would get offended because I knew what he was doing. He's just ignoring me the way I would be ignoring, but he wasn't. He was just different. And I feel like God started showing us that a long time before we lost Landon. And so when Jason grieved differently, for me, it wasn't a bump, but I could see how it could have been a bump, or how it can be a bump for someone else, because I cry. I am like, my emotions on my sleeve, and he compartmentalizes. You know, he will do what he needs to get done, and he might have a moment later while he's watching, you know, what is that, Extreme Home Makeovers, you know, like, and he will sit there and cry.
Yep.
And, you know. And I think that those are the times, though, that he lets it down, and he, you know, but if he's in the middle of something, if he's got business to take care of, if he's got family to take care of, he doesn't show his emotions the way that I might. I sometimes wish I could compartmentalize like my husband does. And so what I would tell people early on who would ask about Jason, and I'm like, he's okay, and he's not faking it. You know, he's okay. You know, he has his moments, but I felt like for Jason, he was dealing with it in a healthy way. for Jason,
Yeah.
you know, and he didn't expect me to be like him. I think he's learned that we are so opposite. I think that's why it works.
Yeah.
I really admire him, and I'm so grateful that he's not me, because I feel like we both couldn't have been as down as I was. You know, I don't know who would have taken care of all the other kids and the household things and working and everything if Jason broke down the way that I did, or even at the same time or over the same things that might trigger me. And so, yeah, I do. I feel like, oh, if people can learn that before hardship strikes, it's much easier. But even if you learn it, or you hear this and you're in the middle, you know, of something, or at the beginning of something, recognize that it doesn't always mean what you think it does, you know, if they're responding differently than you. God really did make us very different people.
Yeah, I could agree with all of that. With Trevor and I was terrified I was terrified that our marriage would crumble, not because on any merit would it, but because the stats would tell you that losing a child will make your marriage falter because of that exact thing, grieving so differently. So we went to City Care twice, just the two of us, and met with a counselor. He was great, and didn't really. I think the things we learned out of it were we're fine. We're working through it, and we are communicating very well. But the thing that we did take away was we both had anxiety different ways. I was defensive. So everything in our house was, we'd seen, you know, going back before Kenzie, we had Mason in and out of the ER for 6 months with breathing treatments and having to fight breathing constantly with Mason for 6 months. And then after we got that handled and on medication, then Trevor had Guillain-Barré, and that took him out for a week. And so then we were fighting that. And then after Guillain-Barré in August of 18, Kenzie died in January of 19. So it was fight. Everyone's taking a hit. My body was the next one after Kenzie. What's next? And so I couldn't break this defensive mode. You know, if Trevor left town or Mason had to go somewhere different than normal, it was like, this isn't okay. Something's happening. So I had to learn how to break that down in my head a lot more. And Trevor was getting some anxiety. So we kind of learned, both of us, how to just work through our head space a lot better. And secondly, we also learned that we process very differently, which we knew, but we're both internal processors. So I journal. And Trevor likes to watch TV, listen to music, and just kind of hang out in his own zone and kind of do that thing. So the problem we ran into was he would be on the main floor watching TV, and I would be up in our bedroom in our sitting room writing. We're processing, not together, not spending time together. And so we had to purposely create space to, whether even if it's just sitting on the couch together, watching TV together, we had to create time to stay a couple together through the grieving. And so half the time we weren't even talking. It's just trying to remember, like, oh yeah, we have to be married. We need to stay together in our environment and not do so much separate processing. All good, all in good reason. But learning that was kind of key. And we learned it pretty early. We'd gone, I think, May and June of 19. So we did it pretty early, and we joke about it now on just the things that we had learned through that now. And but yeah, definitely being communicative. And I think I said this in the last episode. We had talked leaving Kenzie's funeral. Trevor was very honest up front on, we're going to process very differently. I'm going to be on a different track than you. Mm-hmm. That's okay. That's expected. But don't think I'm not here for you. I'm still here for you. And I will gladly step back wherever you need me to be and be there at any point. So if you need to talk something through, I'm right here. And
what a wise man.
He's great. He's great. Yeah. I got a good one. Yes. So it was very helpful to know that even though he looked fine, seemed fine, processing fine, and is fine, he's not leaving me in the dust in this. He's always there. That's been helpful.
That word, I'm fine. Sometimes my wife just doesn't get it, like, hey, babe, I am
You're
fine.
fine.
But
Oh my goodness.
You're not. There's something deeper.
Yeah, having those questions, having those conversations, honestly, is so important. It made me laugh. This just has nothing to do with grief, but maybe grieving my own loss yesterday. Since you said your husbands were engineers, I was at my daughter's school, and I was teaching these kids how to play a game, Chutes and Ladders, which is very difficult. And I was like, don't worry, I'm really smart. I can teach you guys how to do this. And then the kid's like, are you an engineer? And this little boy, he's first grader. And he's like, my dad's an engineer. He's very smart. And then my daughter was like, no, he's a pastor. He's like, oh, that doesn't sound very smart. So you guys definitely got good men, way smarter than I am. So let that be on the record. Jessica, she graduated from the same college. She knows we're not very smart.
Well, speak for yourself. I'm just thinking about grieving, and even I think just like welcoming, I guess the term rainbow baby, or just our new life into your world. But I think that also with that there comes just a lot of things that people could say that would be helpful, or kind of say that can just not be helpful, or just like really foot and mouth situations where you're like, and why did you say that? But I think just for a lot of people that, I mean, I would encourage people, like, and I'm sure you would, to step, like we're saying, step into that space with people. But what are some things that were helpful for you? Maybe some things that aren't helpful if somebody has a friend or a family member, or what was helpful for you around ways to help?
I think for me, actually, to finish out having Micah, COVID hit. So with COVID, it was doctor's appointments. I didn't get to see my own doctor in a very scary pregnancy for me. I didn't get to see my own doctor from February to the week before we had him, June. So I didn't get to see him. Randomly, if I was in the clinic, he would call the doctor that was like on site, and she would transfer the phone to me and like, here, he wants to talk to you real quick, and he'd calm me down. And if you need a high risk OB, I can tell you about all of them, because what was weird is like the high risk OB floor did their COVID treatment way different than the normal OBs. So the normal OBs were all in the hospital, and all the PAs did the clinic stuff. But then on high risk, they were actually on a set schedule and would show up. So I got every high risk OB. So it was really weird, because like they kind of knew what was going on, but they didn't know what was going on. They're just reading notes. So that was really terrifying to go through all of this and talk about it. I got to get induced 3 weeks early, 37 weeks. That was good to have that early and over with. Things were fine right away. My doctor knew that I was kind of sneaky with this blood pressure thing, so he like made me stay the full length of my stay to make sure nothing changed. Nothing changed. Got home, and I think like day 5 at being home with Micah, I laid down to go to bed, and I'm like, oh, my heart kind of feels weird. This is strange. Like, okay, whatever. Fell asleep. I was exhausted. The next night it happened again, and Trevor was actually laying on my chest, and I about passed out. So he fell asleep, and I went downstairs and checked my blood pressure. It was a 180 over 100. So back to the ER we went, but we're still in COVID. So Trevor and Micah are in the car, in the truck, in the like parking lot, and I can only go in. Mason, thank goodness, was at the farm with my parents, and so trying to navigate that. Sure enough, I had preeclampsia, had to do the MAG treatment again. This time I lost 11 pounds off my body, which was a lot. And in the process, they found out my blood had this chemical or whatever that releases into your blood when your heart is under stress. So they were nervous that I was gonna like have a heart failure in the middle of this. So they pushed all the fluid off my system as fast as they could. And then the next day, when things were much more milder, the MAG treatment had done its job. My doctor came back in and said, hey, long story short, you shouldn't have any more kids. Like, you need to be done. Like, this isn't good. And my heart, they did another scan of my heart, and everything had gone back to normal. So I was cleared of any issues permanent. But he's like, you're adding symptoms every single time you try to have a kid. Like, this, we're done. Like, you got to be done if you can. Like, this isn't worth it. He said I had a case where I had a patient that was doing the same thing that's kind of going on with you, and she went for the next one and had a stroke. She's permanently in a wheelchair at this point. It's like, okay, all right. So having that told at the very end was like, ooh, door shut. Mm-hmm. Okay. But then it was the comments of, to back to your question, then it was the comments of, oh, you never know. Maybe we'll see. You just had another one. You had kind of a traumatic experience. We'll figure it out. And kind of this push it down. Maybe you're not done. Don't rule it out yet. It's like, guys, my doctor told me that I should be done. So kind of that, or Mike is here. So, wow, you got a good thing, kind of erase Kenzie, and not saying it like that, but the mentality behind the comment is, oh, it's all solved. See, here's a bow for your present, and kind of that mentality, which doesn't help. So, anything for you?
Anything you can think of that's not helpful? I know you've mentioned like a few different things. So
right, it's not helpful to
tell people they can't be mad at God. That's one of them.
Golly. That's a pet peeve of mine. I feel like, God can handle so much more than people think He can, and He loves us beyond our ability to even fathom it. And I hate it when people feel like they can't be authentic with God. I'm like, no, that's exactly what He wants. He just wants you. Look at Job's authenticity. Job wasn't like saying, oh, God, you be glorified all the time. And God, I just trust you through it was God, let me complain. Yeah. This is hard. But what he did was take it to God. And that's why in the end God could say, listen to my servant Job. He spoke of me what was right, you know. And I'm like, no, that's what God wants. He just wants you and all your authenticity. And so, that's a pet peeve of mine. Or not being able to talk about Landon, I'm like, oh, that's really hard. When I feel like, oh, I'm in a place where I mentioned him or something, and not even in a sad way, like, oh, Landon, he loved those. And it just kind of makes everybody, I'm like, oh, I think if people would realize more, oh, no, we like to talk about our kids. We want to acknowledge that they were here and that they actually continue to exist. We just can't see them yet. So I feel like, for people to be more safe spaces, and it's okay, mention them. And it'll be awkward sometimes. And sometimes you will get it wrong when you say it at the wrong time and the wrong way, because we can be so touchy. But don't stop. Don't stop talking about them. Don't stop trying. Don't stop being there. And so, otherwise I'm a tiger and people are scared to say things to me. So I don't get a lot of comments like, I've heard from other people and I think, oh, I looked for that person. They don't tell me who said it, but I'm like, I'm looking for someone, especially when I was like in my I'm really mad at God stage. I'd come to church, let somebody say something to me, because then I can take it out on somebody, all this junk that I feel. But God protected people, and He protected me too.
That's good.
So
that's good. So, there's so much more we could talk about, but in wrapping up, what are some maybe passages or stories or just characteristics of God that you really leaned into in the middle of this, that if you're somebody, chances are, my guess is somebody, because I'm going to tell people that are going through suffering to listen to this, what are some encouragements that you would offer, or ways that you've seen God at work just in the mess since doing this? Maybe stories you've heard from people that have listened or whatever to your story. How have you seen, what encouragements would you give to take away, either from Scripture, God's character, or just seeing His faithfulness in the stories You've written in your own lives?
Well, God is my refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. Therefore I will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. I'm like, Psalm 46 was the psalm that I made Landon and Maya memorize. And it was the psalm that, boy, we would go to, again and again. God is our refuge and strength. And what does that mean? It means he's here for us. It means even if the earth falls out from under us, God is there. And it continues to be such a source of strength, reminding me of who God is. And I think also one of the big things for me was to recognize I am so loved. Mm-hmm. Because I have a bad day or a bad moment or a bad year, decade, I'm not falling in and out of grace with God. That he's covering me completely. As a matter of fact, he knew all of these things. He knew all of my struggles, my sins, my everything before I got here. And he still chose me. He still was like, Chaka, oh no, you're worth it. I already know how you're going to blow it tomorrow. I know 10 years from now that you're going to sin in this way. And yet I chose you now because my love, my grace is not based on your performance or you're getting it right or you're grieving exactly right or your perfection or in any way, shape, or form. It is all based on my choice. And because I chose you and you're my daughter, I love you. And that has been everything to me, everything. Because it means that I'm free to grieve. I'm free to be just down sometimes. I mean, I'm free to, to whatever. I can take anything to God because I don't have to be afraid that God is not going to be there for me. And I feel like that's one of the things that he continues to teach me. I'm still not perfected in that, but that I am so loved. And it amazes me. I am so loved. Even though I'm a knucklehead, I am so loved. And because of that, I can face so much more than I thought I could, And the last thing I'm going to say is also because one of the things I tell myself often is if Jesus lives, then Landon lives. Mm-hmm. And in order to not believe that Landon is on the other side, I would have to absolutely disregard Jesus and everything that he said he did and who he says he is. I would have to completely throw off Jesus. And so because Jesus lives, Landon lives. And that's huge for me. That gets me through some days.
Amen. It's good.
Yet I still dare to hope. Lamentations 3:21, I believe. I looked back. I mean, I've said this many times today, but I journal a lot. But in journaling, in high school, I actually took a class. My English teacher he noticed that I had a knack for writing, and so he's like, "Have you ever written poetry?" No. So he spent a semester in high school teaching me poetry, structured poetry, written poetry, how to follow the formalities and understand it all. And so in high school, I still have it. It's like a 2-inch binder of poetry, 100% wrote by me. Just that's what I did. And high school is hard. So it was a way for me to just get through the hard days of just not knowing where I was or who I was or what I was supposed to be doing with life and not really knowing where to go and feeling very lost. And so that was something early on that I was gifted to go forward in life. So college, I journaled. And then after Kenzie, I just started writing in these poems and lyrics. And I counted last night, I have over 50 in the last couple of years of lyrics that I've written down and I've sent them to my teachers and stuff and just trying to put this together. And so I as I have processed, I look at the things that God placed in my life early. My 7th grade teacher who noticed, the way that this started was I asked her to start the next book report in advance because I wanted to write something. She's like, have you ever tried journaling? Maybe you should try that. And she saw something in me and worked on it, and then passed it on in high school. When I got to high school, my freshman English teacher noticed I had a knack. He got me into the newspaper. All of a sudden, freshman year, I'm the head editor of the high school paper. And then he said, hey, try poetry. And so sitting down and processing since Kenzie's death, God gave me a talent for writing and for words and for processing in this way. And I'm grateful. I don't know how I would get through this without it, on how much I write. I mean, right now with journaling, I have my journal personally with me. I write in Micah's journal, Kenzie's journal, and Mason's journal. So I write that. And then on top of that, as I've processed and processed more, I've turned all of Kenzie's writings and poetry into a book. I've wrote a book now with it. No idea where we're going with it, but I've wrote it. And it's amazing what God gives you. Like, people are wired so specifically. You know, we just finished going through spiritual gifts at church, and exhortation was my number one. I'm not surprised, but it was, God gifts us so differently for different things. And to be able to look at these and go, wow, you set these in motion way before you knew I would need them. Just blew me away to be able to see that. And I'm so much more prone now to look at things God winks, as I learned to call them in college. But one of them, I've had two that just always just make me want to cry. But both at church. One is Hannah. She, sometime I think after COVID, coming back after COVID, your wife was with your kids in the hallway, and she walked by me, and she said hi, and had this big smile, and it was like Kenzie was smiling at me, and it just has always just meant so much to me, and to watch her grow up was just a blessing to me to be able to see her. And another one is I volunteer in the 1-year-olds. And because of COVID, I actually missed all of Kenzie's class, because I would have had them in ways I think that was probably good. But before COVID, before I was pregnant with Micah, it was in 19, I was watching these kids, and it was during one of the services, and I'm in charge of the 1-year-old classroom, and you know, they're all toddling around, and this one just was really wanting a hug, and just, I'm like, no, I've got these other kids, and finally got to the point where it's like, okay, I will pick you up and give you this hug. And she just melted on me. And it was just this weird spirit moment where it was like, oh, that was Kenzie. Like, this was for me, and this was from Kenzie. Like, it was, I don't know if you have had those moments, but it was just like out of body experience where this hug that she just melted into my arms, and just, I held her, and I had to just sit there and cry for a sec. It's like, whew, wow, that was powerful out of nowhere. And, but just seeing these moments where God is there, He is here, and He is not forgetting and giving these moments to me that I'm learning to be more aware of and watching for. Mm-hmm.
That's good. That's powerful. Oh, man. Well, I am so humbled to have both of you ladies back here again, and to hear, more of your journey and what God's done, and to know each of you. I mean, just a gift that you're both at this church, and Amen. Using your gifts and your pain, that's not wasted, and that God is using it to bring Himself glory, but also to bring people hope, people healing, that on the other side of those pain, those moments where someone is listening to this and they're like, me too. I feel like there's no purpose. I don't want to do this. when they feel like, as you both are sharing your story, it just reminded me of, getting caught in a wave and then finally standing up, and then another wave hits you, and then you're like, and another, there's people that's happening in our lives. It's happened in all our lives. And to give somebody a hope that they can breathe, that God loves them deeply, that he is giving them winks. And oftentimes we just miss them. To hear, the poetry, I mean, that's you writing, and thank God that David did the same thing, right? He used that talent that God gave him to minister and even write Psalms 46. It's just so powerful to even hear all this together and how God writes those stories. And so grateful for what he's written so far, and I'm confident he's going to continue to write a story. He's not finished writing this. And so thank you for sharing, for giving us your time today. And so for those of you who are listening, if you have more comments or questions or want to reach out to us, podcast@cccomaha.org. You can find us on any social media platform @cccomaha. If you would like to reach out to either of these ladies and hear more from them, you can just email us at that same email, and we can help you get in contact with them. And so thank you again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.